former President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to 37 felony counts during a historic appearance in a federal court in Miami. The former president left Miami just moments ago. He's accused of mishandling classified documents and attempting to block the Justice Department's attempts to get them back. He is, of course, the first former president to face a judge over federal charges. Special counsel Jack Smith, who's based here in Washington, has promised a speedy trial. Trump, who took off, as you see there, just a few moments ago, is en route back to New Jersey, where he's expected to speak at his golf course in Bedminster later tonight. This has been a historic day. We realize many of you may have been watching all afternoon or may just be tuning in for the first time. So let's walk through what's transpired in the last several hours. For more, Scott MacFarlane, Finn Gómez, and Robert Costa join us. Scott, of course, is CBS News congressional correspondent. Finn is CBS News political director. Robert is CBS News election and campaign correspondent. Let's begin with Scott there outside the Miami courthouse. You were one of a handful of CBS News journalists this afternoon who were in the courtroom, came out in succession at different key points to convey what exactly had happened in the courtroom. Very old school, but it's done this way, of course, because there are no cameras or photographs allowed taken in federal courtrooms like the one there in Miami. Walk us through what transpired, how it compared to, say, the case back in Manhattan in April, and what it tells us about where this case may be headed next.
Now let's start with the headlines. Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty, the first former president to ever be charged with a federal crime, a crime against the United States, and the judge ordered no restrictions on Trump's international or domestic travel and did not require him to surrender his passport. Not a trivial thing as he campaigns across America seeking to be the Republican nominee for the White House in 2024. He sat expressionless at the defense table, just like he did in Manhattan, his arms folded, the papers sitting idle in front of him, saying very little, and in fact in court today aloud he said nothing. It was his lead defense attorney, Todd Blanche, the same defense attorney he has in the Manhattan case, who spoke for Trump today in court here. And when the judge asked what the plea was going to be, it wasn't the former president, it was the attorney, Todd Blanche, who said that Trump, quote, most certainly is going to plead not guilty. There's no next date scheduled in this case, nor is there any guarantee as to what courthouse this case is headed to. It could be here, still in Miami. It could be months, if not next year, until this thing goes to trial. It could move to West Palm Beach, Florida, or Fort Pierce, Florida. We do know from today's proceedings, Ed, the judge will be handling this case. It remains Judge Eileen Cannon, and if that name rings a bell, that's the same Trump-appointed federal judge who handled challenges to the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago last year and made a controversial ruling limiting the prosecutor's access to some of those records, a ruling that was overturned by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So the former president of the United States has been officially booked, digitally fingerprinted. No booking photo. They took his social security number, his birth date, gave him a pretrial services officer, and said, come back next time we call you in this federal case.
And do we know when we're going to learn next steps? Is it as soon as tomorrow? Or are we talking about several weeks before we get a sense of venue and timing?
We didn't get a schedule announcement here. Part of that is because this judge, Jonathan Goodman, is not going to be the judge of record in the case. He was just here today to handle the arraignment. This moves to a different judge, potentially in a different courthouse, so there were no scheduling announcements. But with the federal court system, you measure calendars by months, not by days or weeks. Hearings are at intervals of months. Court filings can come at any time. But we're talking about something that is easily going to slide later into this year, easily into 2024 as the primaries begin. And one footnote, his co-defendant, Walt Nada, his usher, his aide, the man who is charged with him, sat at the same defense table right next to Donald Trump's attorneys. His arraignment was not completed today. He doesn't have a local counsel of record, which you need for an arraignment. So Nada made an initial appearance. His arraignment is delayed a couple of weeks. I'm told Nada doesn't have to return here for his arraignment. It may happen virtually or just with attorneys.
Scott, real quick, for those that have not been paying as close attention this afternoon, you were among the first to run out and convey some of the details of who was in the courtroom. Give us a sense of who else was in there. I understand just a handful of people that can be classified as the general public because they won a lottery, in essence, to get a seat in the room.
Yeah. quite a diverse group in the courtroom. But first, I think it's important to note that running out of the courthouse in midday Miami heat is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. In the courtroom, Jack Smith sitting in the front row, right behind his line prosecutors on the judge's right in the courtroom. Behind former President Trump, a handful of lottery winners. The court had a lottery of general public members who could go into the courtroom and watch this. One of those supporters told CBS News he's not a politically aligned person. He just likes to watch court cases. He was in town for his daughter's sports camp or sports league competition and came to the courthouse with her to watch the proceedings. Dozens of members of the media were in there as well. But I should note what the defense table looked like, Ed. 5 people: Donald Trump, his aide, Walton Nada, and 3 attorneys, 2 for Trump, 1 for Nada. The Trump attorneys, Todd Blanche and Chris Kise, will be his attorneys through the duration of this case, even to trial, even to appeals.
Scott MacFarlane was part of a team that included Robert Legary, Graham Cates, and Stephen Portnoy, who were in the courtroom for us today. Get a cold drink, and we thank you for your service, sir. Talk to you soon. Now, from the federal courthouse in Miami, former President Trump drove just a few miles to the southwest to a pretty well-known spot in that city. The CBS News political director Finn Gómez knows well. Finn, essentially, he left the courthouse and the trappings of it, away from cameras, facing a judge, in essence, in a venue he did not control, and headed straight for Café Versailles in Little Havana. Remind our audience the importance of that venue there in Miami and describe the scene, because it was, in essence, vintage Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. As you know, Versailles is the iconic Cuban-American restaurant that's been there for over 40 years in Calle Ocho, which has been historically a very prominent Cuban neighborhood where a lot of the Cuban exile community moved to following their departure from Cuba after Fidel Castro came to power. It's also a bastion, or has been a bastion of Republican support, frankly. And as you know, Ed, in the last 2 presidential cycles, Donald Trump has won Florida, and in large part because he made inroads with the Hispanic community, the Cuban-American community especially, which is predominantly a Republican one. So what he did there, and what they were looking to do, is to capitalize on this attention and focus on him, and immediately pivot back to the campaign focus. And also, they knew they would find a friendly audience. As soon as he got there, there was a group of pastors, Hispanic pastors, that prayed over him. He was sang to, his happy birthday was sang to him. Tomorrow is his 77th birthday. And then it's also a chance to, again, refocus on what his campaign says is his success with the Latino vote. And I think by doing that, again, they're really trying to concentrate their attention and momentum that they think they will get out of this to solidify their strength politically in this early stage of the presidential primary race. As you know, Ed, our recent CBS News polling shows that he has a dominant place right now in this early stage, with about 30 to 40 points ahead in most national polls between him and his closest rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Finn, he's now headed back to New Jersey, expected to land later tonight. He's going to Bedminster. What happens once he gets there?
Yeah, and he is on his way back to his summer home, if you will, in Bedminster in northern New Jersey. He is going to be giving a speech tonight at approximately 8:45 now. There's a little bit of a delay. He was supposed to be at 8:15, but it will be at 8:45 now with some of his biggest supporters. Afterwards, he will be having a fundraising event with some of his top donors at Bedminster. Speaking to a senior Trump campaign official, they said their target their fundraising target for tonight is $2 million. They're looking to get out of this event. So immediately, Ed, trying to capitalize on this attention and focusing back on the campaign.
That is one way of putting it, for sure. Leaving the federal courthouse, going right back to the campaign trail, right back to campaign fundraising. the goal, $2 million tonight at that event. Let's see if he exceeds it. And Finn, I got to say, a damn shame he didn't try the ropa vieja while he was at Versailles, but maybe next time.
Right, or
Thank
the
you, sir.
medianoche, delicious.
Exactly, yeah, either one. Thank you, sir. We'll be talking to you throughout the evening. Now, the indictment of former President Trump could have major political implications. That goes without saying. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now to discuss more about the possible effects on the 2024 race.
Good to be with you. Politically, the big question right now is what is going to happen inside the Republican Party? Are Republican voters and Republican leaders still going to stand with former President Donald Trump, who continues to dominate the polls as well as the headlines in this GOP race? The word from so many of my sources in rival campaigns of those running against Trump for the nomination is that they see this as a wait-and-see moment, an opportunity to watch what happens legally and politically as Trump deals not only with the special counsel indictment here in Florida, but the ongoing special counsel investigation on January 6th, as well as what's going to happen in Georgia in August, a possible indictment there for Trump's alleged pressure of election officials, all while that trial on the hush money payments looms in New York. For now, some contenders are starting to speak up about Trump and his conduct, raising questions, sharp ones at times, about what he has done, at least alleged to have done, in this indictment. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is someone to watch in the coming days. He has been having town halls trying to generate momentum, and he has been asking voters to think about what is really said in this indictment, about how Trump allegedly mishandled classified information, highly sensitive stuff that might have dealt with sources and methods that reveal U.S. intelligence if the wrong hands got on these documents. Christie is out there speaking about Trump and expressing his dissatisfaction, his anger even at times about what Trump is alleged to have done. But Christie's not the only one. Former Vice President Mike Pence is also out there, and he's starting to speak up in a new way. I was with him just days ago in Iowa when he announced his campaign, and Pence said to me that it's time, he repeated, to go after Trump, to start talking about the rule of law and the Constitution, not just the political issues. But for now, others in the party, like Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who sat down with me yesterday, they're saying they're concerned with what's in the indictment, but just let it all play out in the courtroom.
Robert Costa, also in Miami. Thank you.